Hello friend, welcome to Stories by Tochi. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please don't forget to hit the like button, please share, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for doing so. Now let's get into the story. The morning sunlight streamed through the small gaps in the curtains, casting a golden glow on the neatly arranged living room. Anita stood by the dining table, carefully packing her son's lunchboxes, her fingers moving with familiar ease. Outside, the quiet hum of daily life had begun, the chatter of neighbors, the distant sound of a vendor calling out his wares, and the occasional laughter of children playing in the compound. It was a routine she had grown to love, a rhythm that gave her life a sense of stability. Junior, her husband, sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone, dressed for work, but not in a hurry to leave. "You didn't forget to put extra juice for David, right?" he asked, not looking up. Anita smiled, shaking her head. "I know my son," she replied, sealing the last lunchbox. It was moments like these, small, predictable, comforting, that made Anita believe her marriage was exactly as it should be. There was no reason to question anything, no reason to wonder if the foundation beneath her feet was anything but solid. When the sound of a moving truck rumbled outside the gate, she glanced through the window, watching as the new family began settling into the empty apartment next door. By evening, after dinner had been cleared and the boys were getting ready for bed, Anita and Junior sat outside on their usual bench, enjoying the cool night air. The compound was peaceful, the kind of environment they had always wanted for their family. It wasn't long before the new neighbors, Melody and Kingsley, walked toward them, exchanging polite smiles. Melody was striking, with a quiet confidence in her movements, while Kingsley had the easy charm of a man who knew how to make conversation flow effortlessly. "We just moved in today," Kingsley said, shaking Junior's hand. "Hope we won't be disturbing the peace around here." Junior chuckled. "As long as you're not planning any midnight drumming sessions, I think we'll be fine." The light-hearted exchange set the tone for what would become an easy friendship. Anita found herself drawn to Melody's calm demeanor. They talked about motherhood, work, and the little struggles that came with balancing both. As the weeks passed, the bond between the two families strengthened. They shared meals, ran errands together, and often found themselves lost in conversation on slow afternoons. If there were any signs of something amiss, Anita never saw them. Everything felt natural, unforced, like friendships were supposed to be. One quiet afternoon, Anita sat in her kitchen, slicing vegetables while her boys played in the living room. The compound was unusually silent. She had grown accustomed to Melody's unannounced visits, the way she would stroll in and settle into a chair as they talked about anything and everything. But today, the silence felt different. It wasn't until later in the evening, when Junior returned from work, that Melody appeared. As Anita and Junior sat outside, discussing their day, Melody joined them as if on cue, her smile bright, her eyes full of warmth. Anita noticed for the first time how Melody's presence always seemed to align with Junior's return. A strange thought flickered through her mind, but she brushed it away before it could take shape. Some things, after all, weren't meant to be questioned. The scent of fried plantains lingered in the air as Anita stood at the sink, rinsing the last of the dinner plates. The evening was settling into its usual rhythm. Junior in the living room, flipping through TV channels, while the boys played noisily in their room. Yet as Anita wiped her hands on a kitchen towel, her mind drifted to something that had been quietly tugging at her thoughts for weeks. It was subtle, so subtle that it had almost escaped her notice at first. Melody never came around when Junior wasn't home. It wasn't unusual for neighbors to have different schedules, but for someone who had once spent countless afternoons in Anita's kitchen, laughing over shared stories, Melody's absence felt oddly deliberate. If Anita left the compound to run errands, Melody never sought her out. But the moment Junior returned from work, Melody would appear, her baby nestled in the crook of her arm, her smile bright and inviting. At first, Anita told herself it was nothing. Perhaps Melody was simply busy, caught up in the responsibilities of caring for a newborn and 2 other children. but the pattern had become impossible to ignore. The thought settled in the back of her mind like a stubborn shadow, silent, but always present. One evening, as the compound bathed in the soft glow of streetlights, Anita sat outside, watching the boys chase each other around in the fading daylight. Junior was still at work, and, as expected, Melody was nowhere to be seen. Anita traced small circles on the cool surface of the bench, lost in thought. The night breeze whispered through the trees, and the rhythmic creaking of a distant swing filled the silence. She imagined Melody inside her apartment, tending to her baby, perhaps rocking him to sleep. Was she avoiding Anita on purpose? The idea felt ridiculous the moment it formed. Why would Melody need to avoid her? They were friends. More than that, they were almost like family, sharing meals and laughter in the easy way neighbors do. And yet there was a lingering unease, an invisible space that had grown between them, a space that only seemed to close when Junior was present. Anita shook her head, pushing the thought aside. She refused to be the kind of woman who suspected shadows where there were none. Trust was the foundation of any relationship, and Anita had never had a reason to question hers. The following weekend, the compound buzzed with energy as the children played under the watchful eyes of their parents. Melody and Kingsley had joined them outside, chatting and laughing as if everything was just as it had always been. Anita stole glances at Melody, searching for any sign of discomfort, any indication that her thoughts weren't merely the workings of an overactive mind. But Melody was the picture of ease, her laughter ringing out freely, her hands gently rocking her baby's carrier. When Junior finally arrived, the usual shift occurred. Melody straightened, her smile growing just a little brighter, her attention subtly shifting toward him. It was small, barely noticeable, but now that Anita had seen it, she couldn't unsee it. The conversation flowed, and yet there was an underlying current, a tension she couldn't quite place. And for the first time, Anita felt something she hadn't before, a quiet, unsettling awareness that something, somewhere had changed. The air inside the compound was thick with excitement when Melody and Kingsley announced they were expecting their third child. The news spread quickly, filling the space with warm congratulations and shared laughter. Anita, standing beside Melody in the courtyard, watched as neighbors clapped her on the back, their voices bubbling with good-natured teasing. "This one must be a boy," one of the older women exclaimed. "After 2 girls, it's about time." Melody laughed, the sound light and easy, but Anita caught the way her hands instinctively cradled her stomach, a quiet sort of relief written across her face. Kingsley, standing nearby, grinned proudly, nodding along with the others. Something about the way he carried himself in that moment caught Anita's attention. His joy seemed rehearsed, like a man playing the role expected of him. But the thought passed as quickly as it came, replaced by the warmth of the occasion. Later that night, as she lay beside Junior in bed, Anita mentioned how happy Melody seemed. Junior responded with a soft chuckle, his voice laced with exhaustion. "Of course she's happy," he murmured, his face turned away from her. "She's finally getting what she wanted." Anita let the words settle in the quiet of the room, their weight lingering long after Junior had drifted into sleep. As the months passed, Melody's pregnancy became the center of attention in the compound. Her belly grew rounder, her steps slower, and with each passing week, the anticipation around her grew stronger. Anita often found herself by her side, offering small gestures of support, helping her carry groceries, sitting with her on quiet afternoons when exhaustion weighed heavy. Melody spoke about the baby often, but always with a certain tenderness that made Anita wonder if this pregnancy felt different to her. She had been pregnant twice before, yet there was an intensity to her excitement now that Anita hadn't noticed with the girls. "This one feels special," Melody admitted one evening, rubbing her stomach as they sat outside watching the children play. The sun had begun its descent, painting the sky in hues of amber and violet. "I don't know how to explain it, but I feel like everything is finally falling into place." There was a wistfulness in her tone, something unspoken hiding beneath her words. Anita smiled, brushing off the uneasy feeling that stirred within her. Maybe it's just the joy of having a boy this time, she offered. Melody nodded, her smile unwavering, but something in her eyes said otherwise. The night Melody went into labor, the entire compound was thrown into a quiet kind of chaos. Kingsley rushed her to the hospital, and the hours that followed were filled with waiting, hushed prayers, and restless pacing. When the news finally came that she had given birth to a healthy baby boy, a ripple of joy spread through the compound. Kingsley returned with a wide grin, accepting congratulations from all around. Anita, cradling her own excitement, prepared a small gift basket, eager to visit Melody at the hospital. But when she finally arrived, stepping into the sterile brightness of the maternity ward, she found Melody gazing down at the newborn in her arms with an expression so full of emotion that it nearly took Anita's breath away. There was pride, yes, but there was something else, something deeper, something raw. "Meet Diamond," Melody said softly, lifting her gaze to Anita. Her voice carried an intimacy that Anita couldn't quite place, as though the name itself held a secret. The baby stirred, his tiny fingers curling into a fist, and Melody's grip on him tightened, as if she were holding on to something far more than just her son. The first few weeks after Diamond's birth were filled with the usual excitement that came with a newborn. Melody barely left her apartment, and when she did, it was always with the baby wrapped securely in her arms. Neighbors visited often, bringing gifts and offering well wishes, their voices filled with admiration as they cooed over the little boy. Kingsley, ever the proud father, accepted the congratulations with a broad smile, his hands resting protectively on his wife's shoulders. Anita was no exception. She made sure to check on Melody frequently, bringing homemade meals and sitting with her during the long, quiet afternoons when exhaustion settled in. Yet, despite the closeness, Anita couldn't shake the feeling that something was different this time. Melody, once so open about her life and emotions, had become more guarded. There were moments when Anita would catch her staring at Diamond with an intensity that made the air between them feel heavier. At first, Anita chalked it up to maternal instinct. Perhaps Melody was simply overwhelmed, adjusting to life with a newborn again. But then there were other things, smaller details that seemed to linger at the edges of Anita's awareness. The way Melody's fingers would tighten around Diamond whenever Kingsley held him, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes when someone else cradled the baby. There was a quiet protectiveness about her, one that felt deeper than mere motherly affection. One evening, as the compound settled into its usual nighttime stillness, Anita stepped outside for some fresh air. The cool breeze carried the faint hum of distant conversations, the occasional bark of a stray dog. She was about to head back inside when she heard voices coming from Melody's apartment. The windows were slightly open, the curtains shifting with the wind, allowing snippets of the conversation to escape into the night. It was Kingsley's voice she heard first, low and firm, though his words were muffled. Then came Melody's, softer but edged with something that made Anita pause. "I just don't want anything to go wrong," Melody was saying. A silence followed, thick and heavy, before Kingsley's voice broke through again. "Everything is fine," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. "We did what needed to be done." Anita felt her fingers tighten around the fabric of her dress. There was something unsettling about the way they spoke, as though they were discussing a secret too delicate to be exposed. She took a slow step back, her heartbeat quickening. She had no right to listen in, yet something about their words rooted her to the spot. What did they mean by "we did what needed to be done"? The words lingered in her mind, even as she forced herself to turn away and retreat into the safety of her own home. As the days stretched on, Anita tried to shake the unease that had taken root inside her, but it was impossible to ignore the subtle shifts happening around her. Melody's presence in her life had changed. She no longer dropped by unannounced, no longer lingered in long conversations the way she used to. Instead, she seemed to withdraw, choosing solitude over companionship. Kingsley, too, seemed different. Though he still carried himself with the same easy confidence, there were moments when Anita caught him watching Melody, his gaze filled with something unspoken. And then there was Junior. At first, nothing seemed out of place, but as Anita observed him more closely, she noticed how his interactions with Melody had a carefulness to them now, as if both of them were aware of an invisible boundary. It was a slow unraveling, a quiet change in the air that only Anita seemed to notice. And though she couldn't quite put her finger on it, she knew, deep in the pit of her stomach, that something was being kept from her. Anita's sister-in-law arrived on a warm afternoon, her presence filling the house with a liveliness that had been missing for weeks. She was a woman of quick words and sharp observations, the kind who never let anything pass unnoticed. From the moment she stepped into the compound, she moved with the confidence of someone who saw through people with ease. Anita welcomed her warmly, eager for the distraction. The past few weeks had been weighed down by unspoken thoughts, by Melody's growing distance and the strange undercurrents in the air. So, when Junior's sister suggested they all sit outside for a while, Anita agreed readily, grateful for the return to something familiar. The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden light across the compound as they settled onto the benches. Junior had just returned from work, and as always, his presence drew Melody out of her apartment. She arrived with Diamond in her arms, smiling as she greeted everyone, her baby nestled against her chest. Anita's sister-in-law's eyes lit up at the sight of him, and without hesitation, she reached out to touch the baby's soft cheeks. "Ah, so this is Diamond," she said fondly. Then she laughed lightly, shaking her head. "I should have known." The words landed like a stone in Anita's chest. She blinked, her mind struggling to process the casual familiarity in her sister-in-law's voice. "What do you mean?" she asked, forcing a smile as she glanced between them. Her sister-in-law gave her a puzzled look. "Oh?" She chuckled, shifting Diamond slightly in her arms. "I just assumed you already knew." "Junior told me about him a long time ago." The world tilted slightly, a slow, dizzying sensation that made Anita's fingers curl against her lap. The moment stretched too long, and in that silence, Melody let out a soft, nervous laugh. It was quick, too quick, before she reached for her baby, adjusting him as if nothing had happened. "I should head back inside," she said, her voice light but her movements hurried. The way she walked away, the way she avoided Anita's eyes, only deepened the unease settling in Anita's stomach. Something was wrong. The moment Melody disappeared into her apartment, Anita turned to Junior, her breath unsteady. He was looking away, staring at some invisible point in the distance. His face was calm, too calm, and that, more than anything, made Anita's blood run cold. That night, sleep refused to come. Anita lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the afternoon's conversation over and over again. Junior had barely spoken for the rest of the evening, and when she tried to bring it up, he brushed it off, saying his sister must have misunderstood. But the seed of doubt had already been planted. And as the house grew quiet and the weight of the night pressed in around her, Anita felt a slow, creeping fear settle in her bones. Her head ached, her thoughts tangled in knots she couldn't unravel. She turned onto her side, hoping the exhaustion would eventually pull her under. But minutes passed, then an hour, then another. Unable to bear it any longer, she pushed the covers aside and made her way to the living room. The house was dark except for the dim light spilling from the hallway. But just as she stepped forward, she heard voices, low, hushed, familiar. She moved closer, her pulse hammering against her ribs. It was Junior and his sister. "You should tell her," his sister was saying. There was no anger in her voice, only quiet insistence. "You can't hide it forever." A long pause. Then Junior sighed, deep and weary. "I know," he murmured. "I just don't know how to do it without breaking her." And just like that, the truth became unbearable. Anita pressed a hand against her mouth, swallowing the gasp that threatened to escape. Her vision blurred as her breath came in quick, uneven bursts. She didn't need to hear anything else. She already knew. Anita sat in the darkness of the bedroom, her body still, her mind in chaos. The silence of the house felt deafening, pressing against her from all sides. She could still hear the faint echoes of Junior's voice, the way he had spoken with the weight of a man carrying a truth too heavy to bear. "I just don't know how to do it without breaking her." The words repeated themselves in her mind, over and over, like a cruel melody she couldn't escape. Her chest tightened, and for a moment she struggled to breathe. She wanted to scream, to wake him up and demand answers, but she knew, deep in her bones, that hearing the truth from his lips would shatter her in ways she wasn't ready for. Instead, she sat there, staring at the wardrobe across the room, her hands trembling in her lap. The betrayal seeped into her slowly, like ink spreading through water, staining every memory, every smile, every moment she had shared with Junior. The life they had built together suddenly felt like a beautiful picture with a crack running through its center, one she hadn't noticed until now. By morning, Anita had convinced herself to act normal. She moved through the house with careful precision, greeting Junior as she always did, making breakfast for the children, responding to conversations with the same warmth she had always shown. But inside, she felt like she was balancing on the edge of a knife. She watched Junior closely, studying every movement, every glance he exchanged with Melody. Did he know that she had overheard? Was he waiting for the right moment to confess? The thought made her stomach twist painfully. When Melody appeared in the courtyard later that afternoon, carrying Diamond in her arms, Anita forced herself to smile, even as her heart pounded against her ribs. She could see it now, something she had missed before. The way Junior's gaze softened when he looked at the baby, the way Melody's eyes flickered with something unspoken when she met his glance. It wasn't just guilt. It was a shared secret, one that had been carefully hidden beneath layers of lies. And Kingsley, where did he fit into all of this? Did he truly not know, or had he been part of it all along? The weight of it became unbearable as the day stretched on. Anita felt like she was drowning, trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. The questions swirled in her mind, each one more painful than the last. How long had it been going on? Was it just once, or had their entire friendship been a lie? And most terrifying of all, what did it mean for her marriage? As night fell, she lay beside Junior in bed, her body rigid, her thoughts spiraling. He reached for her, as he always did, but this time his touch felt foreign, like the hands of a stranger. She closed her eyes, willing herself not to break, but the truth was already unraveling her from the inside, piece by piece. And in that moment, she realized something with chilling clarity. She could never go back to the way things were. No matter how much she wanted to, the illusion had already been shattered. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting soft golden patterns across the bedroom floor. Anita sat at the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, watching Junior as he dressed for work. Every movement he made, the way he buttoned his shirt, the way he checked his watch, felt strangely distant, as if she were watching a stranger instead of the man she had spent years building a life with. He glanced at her, a brief flicker of hesitation crossing his face, as if he could sense the storm brewing beneath her calm exterior. "You're quiet this morning," he said casually, adjusting his collar. Anita forced a small smile, nodding. Just tired. It wasn't a lie. She hadn't slept, not really. Her mind had been restless, shifting between anger, confusion, and a deep, aching sadness that refused to loosen its grip. Junior stepped closer, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead before grabbing his briefcase. "Try to get some rest," he murmured before heading for the door. She didn't respond. Instead, she listened to his footsteps fade down the hall, then the distant sound of the front door closing. And then, finally, she exhaled, a shuddering breath that carried the weight of everything she had been holding in. She spent the day moving through the house like a ghost, going through the motions of her routine while her thoughts spun in endless circles. The children laughed and played, oblivious to the quiet turmoil brewing beneath their mother's surface. Outside, the compound buzzed with life, neighbors exchanging greetings, the sound of a distant radio humming through the air. But Anita felt detached from it all, as if she were standing behind a glass wall, watching a world that no longer felt like her own. The urge to confront Melody clawed at her, but she knew she wasn't ready, not yet. Instead, she found herself observing, searching for cracks in the perfect image Melody and Junior had painted. And slowly, she began to see them. The way Melody's hands trembled slightly when she cradled Diamond, the fleeting glances Junior cast her way when he thought no one was looking, the almost imperceptible tension in Kingsley's posture whenever he was near his wife. It was all there, hidden in plain sight, waiting for her to finally piece it together. That evening, as the sky darkened and the cool breeze carried the scent of rain, Anita made a decision. She wouldn't let this betrayal consume her in silence. She needed answers, not whispered suspicions or half-truths, but the raw, undeniable truth. And she needed to hear it from Melody herself. The opportunity came sooner than she expected. As she stood by the kitchen window, she saw Melody step outside, cradling Diamond against her chest, swaying gently as she hummed a lullaby. The sight sent a sharp pang through Anita's chest. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. This was it. Wiping her hands on her dress, she stepped outside, her heart hammering in her chest. Melody looked up at her approach, her smile warm, as if nothing had changed between them. But Anita could see it now, the flicker of nervousness in her eyes, the way her body tensed ever so slightly. "Can we talk?" Anita asked, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Melody hesitated for only a fraction of a second before nodding. "Of course," she said softly, adjusting Diamond in her arms. Anita took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. No more pretending, no more silence. The truth was waiting, and she was ready to face it. The air between them was thick with an unspoken tension as Anita led Melody toward the small garden at the far end of the compound. It was a quiet space, shielded from prying eyes by the overgrown hibiscus shrubs that lined the perimeter. The distant hum of evening activities, children laughing, the occasional clatter of dishes from neighboring houses, felt strangely out of place, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside Anita. She turned to face Melody, searching her expression for any sign of remorse, of hesitation, of guilt. But Melody was composed, her arms wrapped protectively around Diamond as she shifted her weight from one foot to the other. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, Anita drew in a slow breath, her voice steady but low. "Tell me the truth, Melody. No more lies, no more pretending. Just the truth." The words hung between them like a challenge, daring Melody to deny what Anita already knew in her bones. Melody's fingers tightened around the fabric of Diamond's blanket, her gaze dropping for a fraction of a second before she exhaled deeply. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said softly, the weight of the admission pressing into the night air. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." Anita's stomach clenched, but she refused to look away. "So it's true," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Melody nodded, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. "Kingsley can't have children," she admitted, her voice thick with something that sounded like regret. "We tried for years, and when I got pregnant with our second daughter, we knew the truth. She wasn't his." The confession sent a fresh wave of shock through Anita, but she stayed silent, allowing Melody to continue. "Kingsley loves me," Melody said, her voice cracking. "But he also understood what it meant for us, to have a son, to have an heir. It was his idea, Anita. He told me to find someone strong, someone who could give us what he couldn't." She paused, shaking her head as if reliving the moment. "And then Junior. He was always kind to me, always there. One thing led to another, and," her voice trailed off, but the damage was already done. A sharp, hollow pain settled in Anita's chest as she absorbed the full weight of Melody's words. The betrayal was deeper than she had imagined, layered with choices made behind her back, with justifications that only made the wound cut deeper. Her hands trembled at her sides, fists curling as she struggled to keep herself together. "And Kingsley knew?" she asked, her throat tightening. Melody nodded slowly. He knew. He accepted it. He saw Diamond as his, and that's all that mattered to him. A bitter laugh escaped Anita's lips, the sound foreign even to her own ears. "So, what about me?" she asked, her voice laced with quiet devastation. "Did I ever matter in this decision? Did Junior even stop to think about what this would do to me?" Melody's face crumpled, but Anita had no more patience for tears that wouldn't change the past. The ground beneath her felt unsteady, as if the life she had known was slipping away with every word spoken. She turned abruptly, stepping away before the grief swallowed her whole. "I need to think," she muttered, more to herself than to Melody. And without waiting for a response, she walked away, leaving Melody standing there beneath the darkening sky, cradling the child that had unraveled everything Anita had ever believed in. Anita moved through the house like a shadow, her mind heavy with the weight of Melody's confession. The walls that once felt like home now felt suffocating, as if they were closing in on her with every breath she took. She wanted to scream, to cry, to demand answers from Junior, but a part of her wasn't ready, not yet. The betrayal had settled into her bones, slow and unrelenting, wrapping itself around her like a suffocating fog. That night, as she lay beside Junior in their bed, she felt the space between them stretch wider than ever before. Every breath he took, every slight movement, felt like a reminder of what he had done. He reached for her, as he always did, his fingers grazing her arm in a familiar touch. But this time, Anita flinched, pulling away before she could stop herself. Junior hesitated, his hand hovering in the air for a moment before he withdrew it. The silence between them deepened, thick with unspoken words and shattered trust. The next morning, Anita woke to the sound of the children laughing in the living room, their innocent voices piercing through the thick haze of her thoughts. She sat up slowly, her body aching from a restless night. Junior was already up, moving around the house as if everything was normal, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed, and Anita could no longer pretend otherwise. When she stepped out of the bedroom, she found him at the dining table, sipping his tea, his eyes flicking toward her the moment she entered the room. "Good morning," he said, his voice carefully neutral. Anita met his gaze, searching for something, remorse, guilt, an explanation. But all she saw was the man she had trusted, the man who had built a life with her, now a stranger in his own home. She forced herself to respond, her voice barely above a whisper. "Morning." The word felt hollow, a mere formality. As she moved past him toward the kitchen, she felt his eyes linger on her, as if he was waiting for something. But she had nothing left to give him. As the day stretched on, Anita found herself avoiding him, afraid that if she met his eyes for too long, the dam inside her would break. But the truth refused to be ignored. By late afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows across the compound, she finally allowed herself to stop running. She found Junior in the living room, reading the newspaper, his face a mask of forced normalcy. Taking a deep breath, she walked over and stood in front of him, her heart pounding. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Junior looked up, his expression unreadable. He set the newspaper aside, straightening slightly. "All right," he said carefully, as if bracing himself. Anita felt a lump rise in her throat, but she swallowed it down. "I know," she said simply. The words hung in the air between them, sharp and undeniable. Junior's face paled slightly, his composure cracking for the first time. He didn't ask what she knew, because he already knew the answer. And in that moment, Anita saw it clearly. There was no way forward without facing the truth head-on. Junior's face was a mask of stillness, but Anita saw the flicker of panic in his eyes. It was brief, so brief that if she weren't watching him so closely, she might have missed it. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees, his fingers threading together as if trying to hold himself together. The silence between them stretched unbearably, thick with unsaid words. Anita refused to look away. She had spent too many days, too many years trusting him blindly, believing that their marriage was unshakable. But now, the foundation had cracked, and she needed to know the truth, the full, unfiltered truth. "Say something," she urged, her voice tight with restrained emotion. Junior exhaled slowly, pressing his fingers against his temples. "What do you want me to say?" he asked, his voice quieter than she had expected. Anita's nails dug into her palms as she forced herself to stay calm. "I want you to tell me why." Her voice broke slightly at the last word, betraying the pain she was trying so hard to contain. Junior's shoulders sagged, and for the first time he looked truly defeated. He ran a hand over his face, his movements slow, deliberate. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he admitted finally, his tone laced with something dangerously close to regret. "At first, it was just sympathy." Melody was struggling. Kingsley was, he hesitated, shaking his head. "He was desperate for a son. We talked, and it started as a stupid idea. A hypothetical. Something that wasn't real." He let out a hollow laugh, shaking his head at his own words. "But then, one night, it became real. And after that, it just kept happening." Anita felt the ground beneath her shift. It wasn't just one mistake. It wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a choice, one he had made over and over again. Her stomach twisted painfully, but she forced herself to keep listening. "I knew it was wrong," Junior continued, his voice cracking. "I knew I was betraying you, but I didn't know how to stop. And when Melody got pregnant," he trailed off, looking away. "I was scared, Anita. I didn't want to lose you." The words sent a fresh wave of anger through her, hot and blinding. "You didn't want to lose me?" she repeated, her voice rising. "And yet, you did the one thing that could destroy everything we built?" Junior's head snapped up, his eyes pleading. "I love you," he said desperately. "I never stopped loving you." But the words felt meaningless now, like trying to patch up a shattered vase with fragile string. Anita let out a shaky breath, shaking her head. "Love isn't just words, Junior. It's trust. It's loyalty. And you broke that." The weight of it all crashed over her, suffocating, unbearable. She didn't know what to do, what to say. The man she had loved, the father of her children, had built a life with another woman in secret. And now she had to decide whether she could ever forgive him, or if this was the end of everything they had known. The answer felt just out of reach, tangled in the wreckage of her broken heart. But one thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same again. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you again in my next story.